right, everybody, welcome to the program. This is the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with today's leading writers. It's a books and culture show. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm in Los Angeles. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing okay wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen, and you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. My guest today is Vincenzo Latronico, author of a new novel called Perfection. It is available from New York Review Books, and it was longlisted for the National Book Award as a work in translation. It is also a finalist for the Booker Prize. Perfection was written in response to a 1965 novel by George Orwell called Things, a story of the 60s. Things is about mass advertising and consumer culture and the impacts that these things have on a couple named Sophie and Jerome. Perfection, the new book by Vincenzo Latronico, uses Orwell's novel as a kind of starting point, a kind of scaffolding, and it tells the story of a young couple named Anna and Tom, who are young digital creatives who are living in Berlin as expats in contemporary times. They are working and searching for happiness in a world that has been flattened by social media and digital life and deadened by the relentless surface-level aesthetic and material concerns of consumer culture in our hypermediated and screen-addicted age. I had an absolutely wonderful conversation with Vincenzo Latronico. You don't want to miss it. It's coming up in just a bit. Today's episode is brought to you by Echo Books, publisher of A Different Kind of Tension, new and selected stories by Jonathan Lethem. This is a definitive collection by a master of the form. It also happens to be the official October pick of the Otherppl Book Club. That is my book club, and you should sign up for it over at otherppl.com. Get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I interview book club authors on this program, so I will be in conversation with Jonathan Lethem in the days ahead. A Different Kind of Tension moves fluidly between realism and the surreal, the absurd, and the mundane. It's a book about life and death, couples in trouble, talking animals, and technologies gone haywire. Once again, it's called A Different Kind of Tension, new and selected stories by Jonathan Lethem, available from Echo. Today's episode is also brought to you by Hurley Winkler. What if you had a writer fairy godmother whom you could call anytime you felt stuck? Someone who actually gets the writing life and all of the other stuff that comes with it, like growing your newsletter audience or submitting your work or just finishing that stubborn draft. That's what you get with Hurley Winkler's one-on-one calls for writers. Hurley has a real knack for helping writers turn those burnout-inducing slogs into sustainable routines that you'll actually look forward to. She's sort of like the friend who won't let you quit on yourself. Talking with Hurley is a shot in the arm that'll keep your writing moving. Best of all, Otherppl listeners can get their first call with Hurley Winkler for just $60 over at workwithhurley.com. That's workwithhurley.com and get $20 off your first call with a writer who knows her stuff. So a quick reminder about my weekly email newsletter. Don't forget to sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. I will email you once a week, letting you know about the latest episodes of this program. I also share a list of links to things that I have been reading and finding interesting. So check out my newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. Also, I want to talk a little bit about Deep Dive, my new company, and the writing courses that are now available. The flagship course is called How to Write a Novel. There's also a course taught by Hannah Pittard called How to Write Autobiographical Fiction. These courses are for writers who really want to get a book done. and might be feeling lonely in the process, might be struggling with a draft that feels unmanageable, might be struggling simply to sit down and do the work at all. I think that how to write a novel in particular can be an enormous help to somebody who might relate to what I just said. How to write a novel is more than 50 hours of insight, inspiration, and instruction from nearly 46 of today's most acclaimed contemporary writers. So if the voices in your head aren't working out for you, maybe try some other voices, some other perspectives. Hear from people who have traveled this road and have found their way to the proverbial mountaintop. Instructors include Emily St. John Mandel, Melissa Broder, Steve Almond, Stephen Graham Jones, Viviane Shananthan, Kimberly King Parsons, Juliet Escoria. The list goes on. It's an all-star lineup, and it's a real help to people who are determined to get their book done. You can check out the courses at www.deepdive.audio. Okay, my guest once again is Vincenzo Latronico. His new novel is called Perfection. It is available from New York Review Books. It has been longlisted for the National Book Award as a work in translation, and it is a finalist for the International Booker Prize. Vincenzo Latronico was born in Rome. He studied philosophy at the University of Milan and has published multiple books in Italian, including The Conspiracy of Doves and Gymnastics and Revolution. In addition to his own writing, he has also translated the work of many writers into Italian, including George Orwell, Oscar Wilde, and Alexander Dumas. After spending nearly 15 years in Berlin, Vincenzo now lives in Milan, and I'm very happy to welcome him onto the Otherppl show for the first time. We had a great talk. It was a lot of fun. This is a wonderful book, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here I am with Vincenzo Latronico, and his new novel, one more time, is called Perfection.
When I was in my late teens, by total coincidence, I ended up doing an internship at the publisher Bompiani, who would eventually become my own publisher. And I started working as a translator pretty early because my publisher had bought the rights of an American novel, 12, by Nick McDonnell, who had been written while he was 19. And I was also 19 at the time. And so my publisher said, why don't you try translating that? And I did a terrible job because, I didn't really know how to do it. But I kind of learned the craft, and I worked as a translator from then to basically last year or 2 years ago. At least this was my main way of supporting myself. So with that same publisher, I published my first, all of my novels in Italian, really. But my first two specifically, which are called Ginnastica e Rivoluzione, which means Gymnastics and Revolution, and the second one called La Cospirazione delle Colombe, which means The Conspiracy of Doves. They were very, very different from Perfection. Both books stemmed directly from my active engagement in politics. The first one is about the 2001 anti-globalization protest that took place at the G8 in Genova. It's a bit like what happened in Seattle the previous year in the US. And the second one was about the real estate speculation that evicted a squat in Milan, of which I was part, that was doing a lot of community organizing and community services to build the now iconic skyscrapers with trees. I don't know if you've been to Milan, it's like kind of the iconic piece of the urban landscape now. And they were, very plot driven with a lot of stuff happening. They were quite long, so completely the opposite of what Perfection ended up being. Even before the second book came out, when I had started writing it already, when our squat was evicted, I feel that for me, I kind of took it as a cue to leave Milan. Somehow I had been trying for years to be very engaged in local politics, and every battle we ever engaged had been lost. And somehow that disappointment led most of the people who were involved in that collective to leave Italy, at least for a while. In my own perspective, I think that this had to do with a kind of a disappointment in collective effort. And so I think that for me, moving to Berlin was also a way to kind of say, you know what, I don't need art and politics to be intertwined. I can just go in Berlin, go to raves, do a bunch of drugs, and focus on my work as a writer, which is what I then did for more than a decade.
Okay, so and I feel like Berlin is kind of the place, or it has been in this century, the European capital that most artistic, probably left-leaning, maybe just a little bit disillusioned young people have flocked to. I mean, right? It's kind of been that. I don't know if it still is that in your view, but you were in a cohort. There were a lot of people much like you who were there. It must have been fun.
It was fun, but I mean, I also see a kind of materialistic explanation for this. And the explanation is extremely low rents. So low that you cannot imagine it. Like my first apartment in Berlin was 450 square feet, and I spent 200 euros a month. You know, and this is the kind of low cost of living while being in a metropolis that allows you basically not to have a real job and to kind of live off odd jobs and really focus on your work. And if you think about it, something that I'm really fascinated by is that since metropolises have started existing, this combination of access to an internationally active intellectual scene and the possibility of living extremely cheaply has been a catalyst for cultural flourishing. If you read like the Paris as described by Balzac was like that. Berlin as described by Christopher Isherwood was like that. Isherwood was in Berlin because the money that he made teaching English went a very longer way there than it would have in the UK. Something similar can be said of New York in the 50s and 60s. And I feel that Berlin, at least when I moved there or shortly before, so like at the turn of the millennium, was such a place. And to answer your question, no, this is really no longer the case. Like, I mean, Berlin has experienced an increase in housing cost that is enormous. And to my knowledge, there isn't really another such big Western metropolis where this kind of lifestyle that has been possible since the beginning of the 19th century still is. I don't know what this means. I mean, I know that as a writer, Berlin has allowed me to develop, to work on my, my things for a decade, making extremely little money and still getting by. And this would no longer be possible. If I were 20 now, I don't know how or if I would have the time to work on this so much.
Yeah, I have a friend who lives in Cambodia, and he has like a ranch, it seems like, on Instagram, But I'm like, I think that's maybe where you got to go. You like go to Asia somewhere, like someplace way off the beaten path, and there you can have, a cost of living that can accommodate an artistic lifestyle.
But the thing is that you got both the cost of living and the community. Because, I mean, in Berlin, you got, or in the Paris that Balzac wrote about, you had very cheap rent, but you also have the Berliner Philharmoniker, you had, the cultural institutions of a major international metropolis. And I think that this combination is what makes the spark catch.
Yeah, I'm thinking, too, of like post-World War I Paris, like the Lost Generation.
Yeah.
That's why they were all there. They were all living on trust funds or even some meager stipend, and they could live in Paris.
Yeah, exactly. Also because dollars went a very long way in Paris or in Rome, for that matter. Like when Francis Scott Fitzgerald spent time in Rome, there's one of his letters in which he says, yeah, I mean, here, I can sell a short story and live off it for months.
I mean, yeah, that's like, it's mind-boggling. We're nowhere near that. And you said, you had this publishing success in Italy when you were young.
Oh, it was no success. It was no success at all. Like my first novel was a spectacular failure. The second one got some critical attention, but I mean, and won a couple of like minor prizes. But no, I had nothing of the sort actually.
Well, but at least, I mean, you got published. I think that to me is a success. If you're age 24 and you wrote a novel and somebody wanted to print it, that's pretty good for somebody that age. You were very young. And then you have this sort of political existence in Milan where you're living in this squat with who I would imagine are like other artists, leftists.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were not living. We were just using it as a kind of community center. We were running a neighborhood-based art space. There was a local organic farmers market, an after-school care service, a bike repair shop. But we had decided, because Milan had a history of live-in squats that had like a kind of conflictual relationship with the neighborhoods, we had decided to say, okay, we're going to do something different. We will squat a public abandoned factory that belongs to the government, but we will use it for the community, not for us. And and this worked for a while very well until it didn't.
And then you're disillusioned. You go to Berlin and you tell yourself, I'm just going to be an artist and I'm going to work on my next book.
Yes, this is more or less what happened.
And you were there for 13 years?
I was there in total for 14, with a couple of breaks.
And you were trying to write what ultimately became perfection? Or like, what were you working on? Because I know that it was a frustrating process in many respects. There were maybe some false starts or some failed drafts, correct?
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't even call them drafts of perfection. They were attempts at doing something similar, like what I had been trying to do. And, I started several novels. I even wrote hundreds of pages in total of these different plot lines, these different stories, but they all kind of circled around the same problem, which is the way that the internet is impacting our inner life. Our idea of how we should have sex, how our apartment should look like, what political engagement looks like, what political battles are important and urgent to fight, from the very small to how should you plate a salad, to the very big, as in what are the biggest political problems today. All of these things are shaped by ideas, images, conversations that we absorb through social media and through the constant presence of, news and group chats. And I wanted to write about that. But, even articulating it like this, it sounds very fuzzy. And it's really, really hard to fit this into a plot, which is what I, at the time, still thought was the only thing that as a writer of fiction you can do. So I spent, a decade basically trying to write and develop a plot and characters that could kind of embody these problems. And it always failed.
Until it didn't.
Yeah, until it didn't. I mean, until I read Things, The Story of the 60s by Georges Perec, which is basically the source code of my novel. I mean, Perfection is a rewriting, and by rewriting, I mean a very close rewriting of Perec's book. And in that book, he wanted to do something similar. He wanted to describe how consumerism and the advent of mass media had changed a whole generation's inner landscape, what they wanted from life, what they considered, a good work-life balance to be. And all from that, like major issues to smaller things like what kind of shoes should you buy. And in order to write about this, Perec wrote a book that can read almost as an anthropological study of this couple, Jérôme and Sylvie, two young marketing professionals in Paris in the 60s. And as soon as I started reading it, I found myself, as a kind of game, writing in the margins, oh, this could be craft beer. This could be single origin low roasted coffee. And, I found immediately the correspondences. And then at some point, this collection of notes just became a book. And initially I was quite self-conscious about rewriting so closely a short, experimental, bizarre little French book from 60 years ago that has no plot and no dialogue. But ultimately I did.
Yeah, it makes a lot of creative sense to me that you would have spent essentially a decade pursuing this novel and these ideas and having no success and writing hundreds of pages, as you said, that didn't amount to much. And then eventually writing a very short, compressed, crystalline novel that has done very well. Like you arrived at it. Like all of that work, I think, leads to maybe some of that efficiency in the end, I suppose, if you see it through to the end. And then the other thing I would add is that the use of Perec's book, and I want to say it again for listeners who might have missed it. It's a 1965 novel called Things, a story of the 60s. And you essentially used it as a kind of scaffolding, which I think many artists do. It's not necessarily the common way to go, but it's not entirely uncommon either. And there's some kind of brilliance to it as well. You've written your own novel, your own take on it, but like you said, it kind of gave you the seed for what ultimately became perfection.
I mean, in a way, I think it was quite respectful because, Georges Perec was part of this literary movement called the Oulipo, who tried to find new, often mathematically based ways of exploring new kinds of literature. And one of the main things that they said was that they didn't believe in originality. They didn't consider themselves postmodern, but post-ancient. Because, the ancients constantly rewrote the same myths. And we do not see the work of Ovid or of Virgil as less worthy because those stories had already been told by someone else. We kind of consider them maybe even more worthy because of that. And so in a way, this rewriting also kind of participates in Perec's original spirit.
Yeah, I mean, right. Like all art is collage on some level. And I think there's something like disingenuous about pretending otherwise. Like, I mean, I think maybe the influence that led to your book is a little bit more direct. Like it's more of a straight line, but whatever book you're reading is an amalgamation of influences. And I guess it's just a matter of how well you disguise them. And ultimately leads people to calling you like a true original or whatever. But just to give listeners who haven't had a chance to read a kind of broad outline of the story that you're telling in Perfection, with Perec, what was it? Sylvie and Jerome are the couple at the heart of that novel. And in your novel, the couple is called Anna and Tom. And they are graphic designers from a large but peripheral Southern European city. They moved to Berlin with an eye on reinventing themselves on some level and kind of living this creative life, this aspirational life, this life that might play well on social media, which I don't know if that's their motivation when they start, but it becomes maybe part of the motivation as they live there. And I want to make sure to underscore as well something that you mentioned earlier, which is that much like in Things, the Perec novel, there's no dialogue in this book. And I'm trying to think, what are the other aesthetic restrictions or constraints in the novel? It kind of unfolds like as this anthropological study, as you said.
Yeah. And I mean, then this, of course, didn't really, wasn't, I mean, this is something that could not have made it in full in the English translation. But actually, another main constraint is that every section of the book is written in a different tense. So the first chapter is written in the present tense. The second chapter was written in an Italian tense called imperfetto, whose direct English equivalent is one use of would, like when you say, back when I lived in Cincinnati, I would jog every morning. This use of would, all of that section of the book is written in this tense, which is a tense that denotes something that happens regularly, but not in a specific moment. So you cannot really build a plot with that because there is no cause and effect relationship between the things that happen. But of course, Sophie Hughes, my translator, who did an incredible job, and I would like maybe later to talk a little bit about that. She was like, you cannot use would for every verb in 60 pages straight. This is unreadable. So she kind of sprinkled these woods often enough that as a reader you would get the feeling that this is the tense of the part, but without actually using it all the time. Then the third section is written in the past simple, and the last section is written in the future.
And you're really masterful at kind of cataloging the kinds of products, vacations, where people work out, the things people wear. Like that's part of the beauty of this novel. The part of it that's like very recognizable and almost funny, but also a little bit terrifying, if I'm being honest, and also alienating. Because I'm kind of I'm somebody who has like some awareness of this. I don't know how you could have a pulse and an internet connection and not have some awareness of the sort of thing that you're depicting in this book. But I'm not in it the way that some people are in it. Some of these allusions missed me to, like, you know, the kind of kitchenware or the kind of chairs. Like I'm not somebody who cares about it. Look at me. I mean, you know, but that's what this book is, you know, filtered through the perspectives of Anna and Tom. It's about their surface level reality. This is very much a novel of surfaces, right? It's not a novel of great interiority.
Yes, but I guess that the central bet that underlies this kind of writing, and this is a bet that I took from Perec, is that if advertising and consumer society in Perec's time defines you only as a consumer, so you as an individual are only defined by your relationship to objects, then by exhaustively listing your relationship to objects, I will have technically exhausted everything that there is to say about you. And so the bet in the book is that the sum total of surfaces somehow implies the depth, and you can understand most of what there is to know about these people just by obsessively describing the surfaces of their life.
Yeah, there's something that I think Perec described as passionate coldness. You know, this kind of detached reportage style that unfolds in, I think, both of your novels. And then he credited it to, I think, Flaubert. I think he was drawing from Flaubert. So this tradition of sort of, you know, cribbing from other writers, it goes back. That's the way it works. And I guess I want to talk about this issue of human happiness, because that's definitely something that your book caused me to think about. Like, people who exist in any time, I think, fundamentally want to be happy and not suffer. And we live in a world now where I think most of us, you know, we have a reality that is filtered and mediated through screens almost constantly. And we're hyperstimulated, and we're peering into the lives and minds of other human beings, you know, in this kind of like hyper curated way, you know, the Instagram of it all. And I would love to hear you talk about your own personal experiences of Instagram and this issue of happiness. Like, you know, I'm thinking about Anna and Tom. They don't seem, I would not call them a happy couple of people. And yet they're also very privileged. These are not people who are dealing with like enormous hardship in this novel. They seem like they should be happy in some way, and yet they're not. So that's a bit of a jumble, but I think it's all connected. I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit about Instagram, happiness, Anna and Tom.
Yeah. So basically, you know, what you said is right. The one way of describing the central question of the book is, why do these people who have good jobs, good passports, good health, a nice apartment, love each other, why aren't they happy? And this is the question that they themselves ask themselves when they look at their own Instagram feed, or when they look at their life, which they already kind of see as it would look on Instagram. And it looks great. they don't even cannot really fully formulate the question, why am I not happy? Because they define happiness in those terms, in the terms of, the kind of visible life that you have. And this was also the deeper concern that led me to writing this book. I, in a way, was asking the same question of myself as I wrote it. I was in Berlin. I had been living in Berlin for a decade. My apartment wasn't as nice as theirs, and I didn't make as much money as them. But, I could get by. And yet there was something unfulfilling, something lacking in my life that I couldn't really put my finger on. And, I didn't write the book with an answer in mind. I didn't have a solution, but it kind of came to me. When I wrote the book, I was living in Berlin still and being extremely miserable for several different reasons. I had a big health problem. I had lost my apartment. I was in debt for a kind of utopian endeavor that I had tried to do with some friends and failed. It was during lockdown, the second lockdown in COVID. But in a way, for me, writing this book that is very precisely and deeply about Berlin was also a way to claim the city as my own, to say, okay, I've been here a decade, I speak perfect German, I belong here now, this is my place. But in fact, I moved back to Italy a couple of months after the book came out and haven't regretted it since. And I think that in many ways, for me, that book was ultimately a kind of goodbye to Berlin. And since then, I think I have realized what is the problem with Anna and Tom, why they are not happy and why I was not, is that happiness is not an individual pursuit or like the pursuit of a couple. Happiness is something that happens within a community. I think that the main lack in Anna and Tom's perspective on life, that was also the lack in Jérôme and Sylvie's perspective of life in Perec, which is, if you will, the basic inner pillar of consumerism, is that happiness is something that you reach by yourself, either by being successful in your career or by affording very nice things and a very nice house, or at the maximum by having like a nice couple life or a good family life. But that the unit of happiness is the individual or the family. Whereas coming back to Milan, where I still had, a very, very big community, I had a lot of family, I had like old contacts from my political activism, I knew the people in the street, the store owners, like the bartenders. Ultimately, I'm realizing that I think that the crucial mistake in Anna and Tom's life was that they defined happiness as something that you reach by yourself. And then they got all the points in the happiness checklist, a nice apartment, and they're like, okay, why doesn't this work? And the problem is not that something was missing in the checklist. The problem was the checklist, was the idea that this is what makes you happy.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I could not agree more. I think that, I feel as an American, you can imagine, I feel fairly humbled as a political person. My understanding of my own country has just been completely turned upside down over the past decade. And then, there's multiple world events. It's a totally different conversation, but I've had a decade of
Berlusconi, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's just okay, I wasn't clocking this as well as I thought I was. Maybe my understanding wasn't as sharp as I sort of imagined with, whatever ego got in the way. And I need to maybe take a step back, read some more, listen some more, observe more carefully, and try to figure things out with a little bit more humility. But if I have one fundamental political premise, or if there's a core to my worldview, it is very simply that we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. It can be very easy, I think, for people to lose sight of this. And I think maybe the culture is maybe telling us that these things are going to make us happy because there's money in it for somebody.
Yeah. And it's even, I think it's something that is before politics, I think that what has been eroded are like the structures of community. We use the word community now to refer to the Apple community or the Taylor Swift community, which is something that you can buy into and abandon at any moment. I don't want to be in the Apple community anymore. I throw away my iPhone and buy a Samsung. Whereas the kind of community I think that we are talking about, labor union, religious groups, political parties, cities, nationhood to a certain extent, are things that you cannot just easily enter and exit, which of course makes life more rigid and less free. As a consumer, you're extremely free so long as your credit card bills are paid. But the fact that you are not free to leave gives you a stake in changing things. Nobody would waste time and energy in any kind of activism if they could just, change choose another community. You put in the work because you want your life. You cannot get out so easily. And I think that we are starting to see this again. Like, for instance, I've seen that unionization efforts in the US are becoming much more frequent than they were maybe 15 or 20 years ago. In Europe, and from what I see also in the US, climate and the war in the invasion in Gaza have brought a younger generation to start doing a kind of political activism again that at least in Europe had not been seen since the end of the 90s. So maybe we are realizing that this doesn't work.
And I think too, it's this realization that there's no real escape. Like the couple that you depict in your book, Anna and Tom, are of a privileged set. These kind of stateless people. What do you call? What's the word? The capital. Expats, but also like the kind of worker who can live anywhere. There's like a word for it, that you always see. But
digital nomad.
Digital nomad. That's what I was going for. So they're digital nomads, and to be a digital nomad is a position of privilege. Really, there's a whole subset of the population these days that is living abroad. I just had a conversation the other day with a guy that I was potentially going to hire who, he's living in Porto in Portugal. Mm-hmm. He was formerly living in Boulder in Colorado. And I was like, okay, I know this guy. But lots of people are doing this because their work is, something they can do remotely. And they're looking for a cost of living and a lifestyle, perhaps some kind of escape or adventure. And this is what Anna and Tom are up to. And I think there's maybe this deep desire for happiness to be found in the external, like the experiential, but also maybe the material. Mm-hmm. And there's something kind of cool about saying, I'm from Milan, but I live in Berlin now.
Yeah, of course. And that's the coolness did play a big role in my desire to move there.
Yeah. And so I say this, and then I think about what we were just talking about, this kind of the inextricability of human beings from one another and from their environment, this kind of it's all connected sort of worldview, and I think deep fundamental truth of existence. And I'm thinking, ironically enough, of a video that I saw randomly on Instagram, maybe just yesterday, where I was scrolling, and suddenly there's this kind of attractive Danish woman who is talking into the camera from Costa Rica. And she's in her sort of beautiful house in Costa Rica that she and her partner built. I think they have maybe some young children. They had left Denmark and moved to Costa Rica to sort of live this dream life. They had built this home. It had solar panels. It was in the jungle. You know what I'm saying? It was like the whole dream. Like, we're going to live off the grid and have a simple life, and it's going to be fabulous, and our house is cool. And then she was like, but what I realized is that, being here, as much as I love this place and I love this culture, and I've worked hard to integrate myself and learn the language, this isn't my place. And I'm experiencing it in a way that many of the locals can't. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of flexing all this privilege, hiring these people to sort of clean my house. And you know what I'm saying? It's just she started to feel weird about it. And then she and her partner ultimately decided to sell their house and move back to Denmark. And so I guess a question I would pose to you, since you followed to some degree, a similar track, is whether or not you feel like there could be a kind of yo-yo effect where this trend of digital nomads and young artistic creative people, fleeing wherever they're from to go to Berlin, could there potentially be a retraction where people start to realize, like, I need to be where my community is and maybe where my roots are, and I just need to go there and make the best of it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I mean, and I have a bunch of things to say about this. So the first is that you could see this movement as also having to do with aging. Like, when you're 20, you always think that the best thing is what's right behind the corner, the thing that you don't yet know, that happiness lies, just if you explore a little more. And then, I'm 41 now. I moved back when like the 40s were just in front of me. And I think that it's kind of normal to, I don't remember which writer said that the first 40 years are the text and the other 40 years are the footnotes. But I kind of like this perspective. So there could be that. But I think that there is something different. I think that I've been giving a lot of thought to the difference between expat and immigrant. Because, of course, there are some obvious difference in terms of class and in terms of privilege between the two. And often it's a racialized distinction as well. Like in Berlin, this was very clear. That when, there was the line at the immigration office to get your visa renewed, there were the American expat digital nomads, and there were the Syrian refugees, and the two people had a very different status, even though technically in front of the law they were the same. But I think there is something more to that distinction, which is that you become an expat by buying an airline ticket and renting an Airbnb. This is enough to make you an expat. And so it's also enough, it's also very easy to leave, just as it is easy to come. Whereas in order to immigrate, you need to work extremely hard on shooting roots again in the place where you are. And the work of immigration is very, very hard. It's very, very painful. And you're every day aware of how hard it is. Whereas if you look at the videos of the people moving as expats, what they describe is very easy. But I think that the difference is that at the end of a process of emigration, like my grandmother was Russian and she emigrated and her family emigrated to Italy. So I know how hard it can be, but then you belong. You have roots, you have a community. Whereas as an expat, you never really fully have that. You have other expats, but this also is not really a community because they come and go. Somebody gets a job in their home country, or like their kids want to go to the national school, and puff, from 1 week to the next, they're gone. And I think that this is the root of a kind of loneliness that I felt as an expat, and that I feel many expats I know or whose lives I have read also felt. And this is, I think, the loneliness, the lack that is as the background music of perfection of the book.
Yeah, and I think too, maybe as you're approaching 40, you've been in Berlin for almost 15 years, and I think that would put you in league with Anna and Tom, who are sort of expats who have hung on. They've been there a while. They're sort of like, they kind of consider themselves the old guard, right? They know how to operate on the ground. They speak the language. They feel at home. They know where the restaurants are, whereas they're seeing this kind of seasonal renewal, which you depict very beautifully in the book, where like every spring, there seems to be like a new crop of expats showing up, kind of wide-eyed, ready for an experience, excited to be there. And then, like you say, maybe in the winter or something, you'll just all of a sudden realize that some people have disappeared, and have gone home or something. But I want to, there's these differences, and I think some of it's, just has to do with maybe generational stuff or how old somebody is. But in a kind of related way, I want to talk about the sameness that you are calling out in your book, and this kind of flattening of culture that you are drawing so beautifully in your book. That is, I think, for me anyway, at the heart of this sadness that underlies the text. The internet does this, and I think for somebody who is maybe younger than I am, just different life circumstances. I'm sort of been planted in place for a long time, but if you're traveling a lot, maybe especially in like Western Europe, where there's lots of different cultures and relatively close geographic proximity, and you're going to different capitals around the world, and you're starting to realize that to a disturbing degree, they all sort of seem the same after a while. They all kind of have the same aesthetics. Everybody's apartment in every city all over the world, all these Airbnbs look the same. That bums me out.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a mystery if you think about it, because, I grew up in the 90s where the big political enemy was what we then called globalization. And the metaphor for globalization was McDonald's, in which you can go to a McDonald's in Rome or in New York City or in Stockholm or in Buenos Aires, and they would look exactly the same. And they would look exactly the same because some corporate office somewhere in the US had kind of beamed out the protocol for what a McDonald's should look like. Funnily enough, the same thing is happening today, or was happening recently. You can go to a coffee shop in Berlin or in Los Angeles or in Oslo or in Barcelona, and it will have the same organic roasted coffee, the same matcha latte now, the same menu written on a blackboard with chalk. But there's no central corporate office. All of these things have kind of popped up spontaneously. There's no school for how to make a coffee house look. And yet, they all look the same. And the propagation of this aesthetics is what fascinated me, because of course it's not just an aesthetics. All of a sudden, people in the privileged parts of the world, in the West, if you wish, have started talking about polyamory. Remember, 10 years ago, nobody knew this word. And like now, so many people, so maybe, the passion for kitchen implements didn't reach you, Brad, but I'm sure that the conversation about polyamory did. And it's fascinating, like the degree to which this uniformity does not just apply to the outside, but also to the inside of our life somehow. And for me, at least, it's hard to talk about this because, to a certain extent, this is an improvement. So let's say the urban design aspect of this homogenization is what we call gentrification. And in many ways, gentrification is an improvement. Like, objectively, there are nicer restaurants, the streets are cleaner. Like, a gentrified street offers a more optimized consumer experience than a non-gentrified street. But what you lose are the differences. And this was so evident in Berlin, whose history of, the bombardment in the Second World War, the division between the East and the West, made it such a unique place. It was empty. There were empty lots everywhere. Half of the real estate stock was in public hands and nobody knew what to do with it. It was a place that had been made unique in the good and the bad by history. And of course, now it's homogenizing more and more. And like every 5 years, the streets of Prenzlauer Berg and Neukölln and Kreuzberg look more and more like the streets of Brooklyn, which, again, is in some senses an improvement. In some sense, it's a loss of differences.
And I mean, this brings us to the title of your book, which I think really nails it. I'd love to just hear you talk about how you arrived at it. I mean, I have to believe it maybe happened towards the end as you sort of realized what you were up to, or maybe it came early. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the title that I had, the working title that I had for most of the writing of the book was Abundance, not Perfection. Then I decided against abundance because in Italian it sounded really ugly, like abbondanza. I didn't like the sound of the word. And so when thinking about alternatives, I thought, there's something I should have said. Perfection is not the title of my book. Like the original title of the book is Le Perfezioni, which is plural. It means perfections. And I arrived at it because I was thinking about, I've been thinking for years about this, let's say, emotional, cognitive impact that the internet and particularly social media have. And I think that the first artist to really, really nail it and to do a work about this was filmmaker and visual artist Amalia Ullmann, with a performance called, a performance and Instagram work called Excellences and Perfections, which of course for her was a way to describe what an Instagram feed looked like, the excellences and the perfections of your life. And so I was like, yeah, I have to use this word also because I liked that the plural of perfection has a subtle contradiction in it, because you can imagine having one perfection, but the fact that there's several kind of, it shouldn't be possible, right? Perfection means completeness. That you cannot have several completenesses, because something is complete, there's no room for anything else. And so I was fascinated by the kind of strangeness of the word, which you normally don't use in the plural. But then Sophie Hughes, my translator, and both my UK and my US and my Australian editor heard this beautiful explanation that I just gave, and they were like, no, perfection singular is better. And I mean, the book sold much, much better in English than in any other language, so they were right.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. And, I guess, yeah, we can bring this up now because you wrote this book in this state of depression. You were kind of at your wit's end. You were coming to the end of your time as an expat living in Berlin. And I read when I was prepping for the conversation that, when you finished a draft of this book, again, it's not a very long book. I don't even know how many words it would be. Probably like a 40,000 word book or something.
I don't think in words, but I think it's, 40,000, more or less 40,000. Yeah.
Something like that. So you hand it in to your editor or your agent, and you're sort of apologizing as you do, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I started writing this book after moving back to Berlin, after 2 years that I spent living in the countryside with my ex and a group of friends. We had bought a house in ruin, and we spent 2 years trying to renovate it and to make it into this big communal country living project. Of course, it failed spectacularly. This kind of thing always does. And so at the end of this, I moved back to Berlin in a temporary apartment with a huge pile of debt that I still have related to this project. No real job prospects. I was a writer who hadn't published a book in almost a decade. Was I even a writer? I don't know. I had a very impactful health diagnosis that then kind of went better. It was the second lockdown, winter in Berlin. You get 5 hours of daylight, quote unquote, every day, which is normally just like a gray light box. It didn't really, and for a decade, I had tried and failed to write. I was really having almost no confidence in my ability to write something that was satisfying to me. And I think that, I took up writing this rewriting of Georges Perec also because I had a blueprint. So I could tell myself, it was, I couldn't go out. It was COVID. And I needed to find something to structure my days. And so I started saying, okay, every morning after you meditate, after yoga, you just open Perec's book, read 2 or 3 pages, and rewrite them. It was, I needed a way to tell myself that this was not an actual book, because otherwise I would have not had the trust in my ability to finish it. This was a game I was playing. And so when I finished it, I didn't really think it was publishable at all. I sent my agent this email that said, I'm sorry. You've been waiting for a new manuscript for a decade. And here I come with this novella that has no characters and has no dialogue and has no plot and is the copy of another book. And she was like, oh, yeah, no, we think it's good. And now it's sold in 42 countries. So, the novel has sold in 42 countries, and the English editions have sold more than 85,000 copies. It might be more than that by now, but that's what I read. Yeah,
that's really extraordinary for any work of literary fiction, especially one that is like, I suppose you could call it a novella or a novella. These distinctions are very blurry, but
you know that Italian doesn't have it.
Interesting.
So you don't have a separate category.
Yeah, I I'm not a huge fan of these distinctions. I love a book that is 40,000. Like I love a novel that is 40,000 words. I love something that you can read in one sitting that doesn't feel too slim. It feels like it has all sorts of big ideas. It's kind of bursting at the seams. And I don't know. This is right up my alley. And I want to talk too, while we are discussing the book's appeal and the fact that it's kind of been your breakout book, about whether or not you view what you're doing in Perfection as satire, because I think it is sometimes read that way. And I want to say I read that you push back against that. Like, you don't view this as a satire?
I mean, I don't fully push back simply because I think that once you send out a book, it's not your reader's fault if their reading of it is not yours. Of course, Brad, if you said that my book is set in Barcelona, I could say, no, this person, is wrong. But if you say that you see it as satire, the only conclusion I can draw is that maybe I wasn't good enough at pitching it at the exact right point where I wanted it to be. Because, I mean, of course, some parts of it can read like satire, but I think that the essential movement of satire is a separation. You can punch up or you can punch down, but when you satirize something, you as the writer put yourself at a distance from what you are satirizing. Whereas I see myself and I feel completely within it. And, the book is a work of fiction, but every detail, every thought that they have, everything that happens to them is taken either from my own life or from those of my friends and my acquaintances. And I didn't want to use that for a cheap laugh. I mean, I think, of course, you can make fun of your friends, but you wouldn't say that you satirize them, right? Maybe you make an impression of a friend that has a particularly affected way of talking or something, but it's something that has both satire and affection in it. And this is what I tried to reach. And also, I think it's the main point of distance between Perec's book and my book. Perec's book is much more judgmental of its characters than mine is, but it's also because Perec had a theoretical and philosophical standpoint from which to criticize Jérôme and Sylvie. They were two fools who had been brainwashed by consumerism into thinking that a new pair of shoes and a new leather sofa would make them happy. And Perec had the tools to judge them like this, because those tools were provided by Marxism. And Perec's book ends with a long quote from Marx. It's like the last page of the book. And that's the only thing that it did not update, did not copy. There is no ending quote in my book, because I feel that today I don't have an alternative view of life and of relationships between people and of the way society should be that I can use as a vantage point to really satirize and criticize and judge the characters, because I am exactly where they are. And so I think that this resulted in a less judgmental approach. Then if people read it as satire, I mean, they're right. And I probably, didn't mix the ingredients in the right proportions. But what I was really aiming for is something that blended satire and a deep affection and a kind of kindness toward them.
Well, it's also recognizable. Like even the parts that I wish maybe weren't so recognizable. And, when it comes to the world that we live in now versus the world of the 1960s that Perec was depicting, the world that he lived in wasn't nearly as flat. The internet and social media culture has made the plight of Anna and Tom not at all unique to so many people who will read this book. It's like there's a part, I think, in the book where they go to, Lisbon?
Yeah.
And you're kind of writing about how they're looking for Airbnbs, and everywhere they go, they're basically looking for a place that reminds them of home or like the kind of thing that they always want, and it's like, yeah, I think I laughed like with a little bit of like derision, but then I also had to check myself and be like, yeah, I think my wife and I do that too. Like we're looking for an Airbnb and we sort of want it to feel like our own place instead of something different. Like, what does that mean? And it also makes me think like at the end of the spectrum that I think is maybe the most intense example of this, or like the kind of like most extreme of these celebrities. I don't know if you'll know these people. Do you know who Ellen DeGeneres is and Portia de Rossi?
I know the first person you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. So they're a couple. And I don't know how I know this, probably from Instagram. I know. And you know what? Interestingly, I want to say Ellen, maybe Portia too. This was years ago, looking at the house next to mine when it was for sale in Los Angeles. It was very strange. Mm-hmm. It was an odd design. It was kind of this Egyptian architecture. Los Angeles is a massive architecture, but there was an upstairs patio where you could stand outside. And I was walking home. I was probably walking my dog, and I looked up, and Ellen DeGeneres is standing on the balcony of this house looking down at me, and she smiled at me and she waved. We just made eye contact, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing here? It was that kind of thing. And this was years ago. They didn't buy the house. At least I don't think they did. But I subsequently learned that they are very successful house flippers, where they buy a house, they might live in it for like 6 months or a year. They renovate it. You know what I'm saying? They make it exactly how they want it. And then they're almost immediately bored of it, and they sell it and they move somewhere else. And they make money every time they do this, because they're buying these multi-million-dollar properties. They're very wealthy. So after Trump got elected this past election cycle, they fled the United States for very understandable reasons. This is a lesbian couple. They're probably like, I'm getting the fuck out. So they have the resources to do so. And they went to England and they bought this, beautiful home in the Cotswolds, like outside of, like in the British countryside, not too far from London. And I somehow was reading about it. They've already gotten sick of the first place that they bought, but they had renovated it. And I was kind of looking through the photos on Instagram. They had renovated it to look just like the interior of a home that you might see in like Beverly Hills. And I was like, like everywhere they go, they're just trying to kind of recreate the same shit that they had when they were living in Montecito or Santa Barbara, wherever it was. So anyway, that's a little bit long-winded, but what is it in us? Like, shouldn't we be seeking out something different if we're moving all the way over to the Cotswolds or to Berlin or to Porto or Lisbon or wherever it is?
I mean, I don't know. It is something I keep thinking about because, if you think, for instance, of the architectural movement that in Germany was called Jugendstil, I think is Art Nouveau or Art Deco in like the Liberty, like in the 1910s, and was with these like elaborate bow windows and very ornate moldings on facades. And if you look at that architectural style, it is extremely homogeneous. It's in Vienna, it's in New York, it's in Barcelona. In a way, just like what Ellen DeGeneres did. But of course, at the time, the transmission of information was very imprecise, very lossy. So by the time the architectural style of Vienna gets to Barcelona, it changes and it gets like its own local character that is different. And this is what we have come to appreciate as, variations in cultural style. I think that the problem that you're describing is a problem of progress. Like we have become too good at transmitting information. And so the transmission is instant and lossless. And so this creates a homogeneity. And if you think about it, I'm really fascinated as a novelist by another side of this paradox, which is that we consider progress as, the gaining knowledge about the world. We know much more about the world today than we did 200 years ago, than we did 2 millennia ago. We look at the stars and we don't see godly presences. We see masses of burning gas. This is great. It's good that we know this. But this process also belies a loss of mystery. Progress is the disappearance of mystery. And mystery is what makes many stories work. A new stranger, the Count of Monte Cristo, arrives in town. Odysseus is lost at sea and doesn't know where he is and takes a long way to come back home. Two lovers are separated and they have to find each other again. These things could be solved with an iPhone today. And they are, and so like one side, a smaller side of this problem of like the optimism, like we are winning the fight against mystery and ignorance, but by winning, we are losing the mystery, which also made life more tasty.
Yes, well said. Well said. And I suppose I want to end the conversation, I guess, in three different ways. First of all, I want to reiterate something that you mentioned earlier. I always do this when I'm reading a work in translation that's particularly good, but Sophie Hughes deserves some applause. This is a fabulous translation.
I mean, I must say, several people who have read both versions told me that the English is better than the Italian, and I agree. I mean, I think that she did an incredible job that in some ways was also part editing, not because she changed anything, but because we engage in so much conversation, she asked so many questions, and through her questions, I understood my text better than I did before. So the end result is actually better. So much so that now I would like her to kind of edit my future writing directly in Italian, because I really felt that I'm a translator myself, so I know when a translator does a good job. I've never done nowhere as near a good job as Sophie has done with this book.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, just the fact that you have some experience doing the work that she does probably made the conversations that you had more meaningful. You know, you guys had maybe a shorthand, but she did a really wonderful job. And I feel like I always say literary translators are too unsung. Like when they do their work really well, it's deeply meaningful. I would not have had the experience of reading this novel, probably, had she not done such a fabulous job. And I'm guessing it would not have sold 85,000 copies in English.
Yeah, exactly.
Had she not done such a wonderful job. So kudos to her. And then I want to bring the conversation sort of full circle to talk once again about happiness, because I think this is really the heart of your novel. You know, we talk about surfaces and this expatriated lifestyle and the social media of it all, like all of the sort of external stuff that this novel is concerned with. But at its heart, it's about, it feels to me like an interrogation of what is happiness. And I think what you said at the beginning is so beautiful about how it's not an individual affair. It's a community that ultimately creates happiness. It's relational. And I guess if you think about that in correlation to these ideas of perfection and this kind of pursuit that so many people find themselves ensnared by, like trying to keep up with the Joneses, as we say in America. I don't know if is there something similar you would say in Italian? Keep up with the Fellinis or?
No, but I know exactly what it means.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have, you come away maybe a little bit happier than you were, certainly in the depths of that Berlin winter? And do you have a sense of optimism about the future for human beings when it comes to the way in which we relate to each other and relate to the environment we live in?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's not a nice way to end the conversation. I mean, I don't know. You know, if you ask about humans in general, I think somehow we will do. If you ask about the next 10 years, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way too. I don't, you know, I kind of have to be an eternal optimist. I have young children. I always say that. Like, I don't think I have the luxury of just being like, well, it's fucked. Like, I got to believe that a better future is possible. And I have to kind of embody that in an authentic way for my children. But if I'm being totally candid with you, the more that I see the situation in America deteriorate, the harder it becomes for me to believe that there's going to be a resolution, which I do believe is coming. I don't think, nothing is permanent. This is not going to last forever, this darkness. I think the open question is, well, how long will it last? It could last until after I'm gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way it's strange because this is the perspective problem of the people who were born from the baby boom on, is that we had this illusion that everything would just improve, because this is what our experience of living in the West, born after World War II, actually everything seemed to always be improving. And we had, both in terms of civil rights and in economic terms. But this was the experience of nobody before this time and age. Like, And so I think that maybe what we're living through now is not an exception, it's the norm. We just happened to be born during an exception.
Yeah, and I feel like as I kind of try to be candid about it, I don't think that a resolution to whatever darkness we are living through is going to come through any kind of traditional political means. I think it's going to have to take something extraordinary that involves community. So I feel like that's related to this idea of happiness as a community endeavor. I think it's going to be people in the streets across ideology who maybe come to some sort of common understanding.
Yeah.
And I don't know what will occasion that common understanding, because we don't seem to be anywhere near it yet, at least here at home. I feel like there's a lot of maybe needless separation, because the concerns that I'm talking about are so universal. It's like, how are we going to get healthcare? How are we going to protect the environment that we live in so that our kids and grandkids like have a planet to live on? Like, these things shouldn't even be political, but they seem to have been politicized. And it's going to come, like change is going to come when I think the masses of us realize this. And then maybe also when we get to a point where the darkness is so intolerable that we just get out and organize.
Yeah, it's strange. I agree. And I think that, as you might have seen, I mean, I think a lot about real estate. I've also been reporting a lot about real estate since I moved back to Italy, because I think it's a key to understanding many aspects of today's life in the West. And if I have to see a glimmer of political hope, I see it paradoxically from the affordable housing crisis that every major city experiences. Because I think that maybe people will, what you were saying, will be able to momentarily overlook their differences when they are both realizing that they're being screwed over by their landlord. And they can say, okay, I'm a fascist, you're a communist, we agree to disagree on everything, but let's fight against this guy. And then maybe this can be a platform for, more collective action. So if I have one paradoxical hope in the current situation, is from tenants unions.
Yeah. Well, final question. I always end by asking my guests if they have another book in the works. I'm wondering if you are working on something new, and if you are, if it is in any way related to perfection and the themes and ideas that you were exploring in it. Like, is there going to be more along these lines? Or are you working on something totally different?
I mean, I'm working on something different that has to do with, is inspired by the time that I spent in the countryside trying to, So in a way, it's very different because it's about community building and it's about the very practical work of the countryside and a renovation. On the other hand, of course, it's itself an Instagram subgenre, as you said, of like city people moving to the countryside. So of course, it is related in that the characters in the book I'm writing could very well be friends with Anna and Tom.
I am so excited to hear you say this, because when you mentioned this earlier, this sort of failed communal endeavor, the thought flashed in my mind. I was like, please tell me you're going to write a book about this. Like, I will line up for that book, because I am somebody who is very susceptible to these kinds of fantasies. Like, I have been nursing a dream of like a house in the country removed from everything, lots of dogs. I have this whole thing planned out.
Horses.
And yet it's very comfortable and beautiful. It's got solar. There's a pool somehow, all this stuff. But that sounds like exactly the right project for you. How close are you to finishing? Are you just in the middle of it, or are you getting close to a draft?
I'm getting close to a draft. I think I will have a finished draft by February.
Okay. Well, I certainly wish you well on it, and I congratulate you on the success of Perfection. It's a wonderful novel, and I'm grateful to you for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you very much, Brad. I am grateful to you.
Okay. There we go. That was Vincenzo Latronico talking with me about his novel Perfection, available right now from New York Review Books. It has been longlisted for the National Book Award as a work in translation, and it is a finalist for the Booker Prize. Wasn't that a great conversation? I loved it, and this is an excellent book. You should read it. Again, it is called Perfection. You can find out more about Vincenzo online, kind of. His website is pretty minimal. It's vincenzolatronico.com. When you go there, it's a blank white screen and it says nothing here. You can also follow him on Instagram. Just read his book. That's really the point, right? One more time, it's called Perfection. It's out there now from Vincenzo Latronico, published in English in the United States by New York Review Books in a brilliant translation by Sophie Hughes. So hats off to her. She did a magnificent job with this novel. Don't forget to subscribe to the Otherppl podcast wherever you listen. Hit that subscribe button. You can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. You can sign up for my weekly email newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you love this show, if you tune in week after week, if that means you, if that describes you, I hope you will support this program over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep it going. If you want to join the Otherppl book club or get an Otherppl t-shirt or a sweatshirt, you can do that at otherppl.com. If you would like to get your novel done, if you need a little bit of help on your writing and you want to hear from people who have been there and done that, check out deep dive courses over at www.deepdive.audio. And finally, if you have a minute and you want to help me out, do me a favor, make me happy, please give this show a rating wherever you listen, preferably a 5-star rating or whatever it is, a good rating. Rate it, review it. It helps the show in the algorithm, and it helps it find new listeners. Okay, happy Sunday, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in. On Tuesday, there should be a brand new episode of this show, another author interview. We're coming up on 1,000 author interviews on this program. I think we'll be at, 998 as of Tuesday? That's crazy. But I can't tell you who it is yet because I don't have it on tape yet, but let's just keep our fingers crossed. All right?